definitely an interesting game. Not a defensive one by any means. I think the interesting part for me was that the Falcons' passing offense really came alive. Although this game was close in score, it wasn't actually necessarily close in terms of like total yards, plays ran, all that kind of stuff. Like you look at Kirk Cousins with his 500 yards to Baker Mayfield's 180. So in terms of like yardage, he absolutely dominated. So then you think, okay, well maybe the Bucs like ran the ball a ton, which they did. They had 26 runs for 160 yards, but that gap doesn't overcome the 73 total rushing yards that Atlanta had. And so the key there was just simply the turnovers. Obviously, when Atlanta was turning the ball over, they were turning it over and, giving the Bucs some short territory where for Tampa Bay, they were making them drive down the field. And so that was definitely a difference maker. But the Bucs, unfortunately, the defense wasn't able to be up to the task. Kirk Cousins and that passing attack went crazy. Felt like this was like Drake London's true breakout game for his career so far. 12 catches, 154 yards, and a touchdown on 13 targets. The man absolutely lit it up. And I believe he scored... Was it the last touchdown in OT? No, it wasn't, because that was Kadero Hodge. I'm confusing it with the Eagles game in which he scored the last touchdown there. But regardless, so he's had clutch moments throughout the season. Now he has like a huge game where he really shows out. Darnell Mooney continues to perform. Kyle Pitts had a pretty solid game as well. And then like we just talked about Kadero Hodge, he kind of had the game sealing moment. And the run game was decent too. They were trailing for a lot of the day. So they weren't really able to like maintain the run game, I think, as much as they maybe wanted to. But even then, Bijan Robinson, 12 carries for 61 yards, averaging a little over 5 yards a carry. You'll take that. So solid day from the Falcons. For the Bucs, they honestly, I kind of felt bad that they lost because it just came down to the overtime rules. And I still am an advocate that they should change it in the regular season like they did in the playoffs. It's frustrating when we get to see these kind of games where like Baker Mayfield had a great performance. The run game was cooking for Tampa Bay. The whole offense was looking good. And yet, simply put, they weren't able to have a chance to respond because the Falcons got the ball first and they scored. These kind of games, especially a Thursday night game, right? Like I get it if it's just like a normal 12 o'clock regular season game, but a Thursday night game in a primetime slot and, we get to OT and it just ends immediately. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like the fans and the ratings and all the money and everything, why not just allow them to have a chance to respond? I don't know. And then here's my take too. Let's say they both score touchdowns. Go sudden death after that, obviously, like which I believe is how the playoffs work, right? It's if you both score, then sudden death. Yeah. So it's like, what's the worst? What's the harm in that? I don't get it. I feel like with OT, the whole point of it is to decide a winner, and it just sucks. I know that all the people online have the argument of, well, you got to play defense. Well, then why don't we force the other team to also play defense? Why does only one team have to go out there and play defense? Why don't we force both teams to play defense? If you want to make OT a true encapsulation of football where people go, well, you got to be good on both sides, well, then force both teams to be good on both sides. Because in the current OT rules, if you're the better offensive team, or if it's a shootout like this one is, then it just comes down to who wins a coin flip, which I'm not a big fan of. So credit to both teams. It really didn't feel like either team deserved to come away with a loss in this one, but that's the NFL, and Atlanta was able to come out on top. So a big shout out to Kirk Cousins, that passing offense, because after the first couple weeks, it definitely looked like something was off. I mean, that game against Pittsburgh, they just couldn't get anything going. And now on the flip side here, in a huge divisional game, in a primetime slot where, people have talked a lot about Kirk Cousins in primetime slots, they came out big time.
Yeah, obviously that's a great shout there in regards to the primetime stuff. But yeah, I mean, like, just to kind of continue what you were saying, this is why they went and got Kirk Cousins, because they couldn't do this last year. This is definitely a game they lose with, whether it's or either before, whether it's Mariota or I'm blanking, or Desmond Ridder. But you see with Kirk Cousins still orchestrating the offense. Like you mentioned, even his one interception didn't really hurt them because it was towards the end of the game, ironically, and then they forced the Bucs to go 3 and out, and then they hit that, set up the field goal to go to overtime. And yeah, like you said, it was a little fortunate because really, especially the first half, I will say, Bucs were doing whatever they wanted offensively. I mean, really, they scored on every drive except for technically the last drive of the half, but that was a kneel down because, they were not in position to do that with 12 seconds. Second half, obviously, forced a few more field goals. Then, obviously, the biggest play, I think, was just the Jesse Bates forcing the fumble on Bucky Irving because the Bucks, it looked like it was about to be night game over. Like Bucks were, it was 1st and 10 on the Atlanta 32. Bucky Irving gets 7 yards, but then Jesse Bates gets his head on the football, punches it out. I know once again that, that Atlanta end up throwing an interception, but still kind of ruined any Bucks momentum and obviously field position change. And because even then, obviously if they don't fumble, it's very likely a different game. And Atlanta maybe has to score a touchdown instead of, just getting a field goal there at the end at regulation. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, just unfortunate that at that point, because then Atlanta wins a toss and then it's like, oh, now defense, you have to go back out there again and, and get us another stop after you just went through a probably exhausting 2-minute drill and such. So, yeah, a little unfortunate there. I will say, too, along with that, didn't really play into Todd Bowles' hands and his style. This kind of shootout, he's very aggressive and just didn't. Once again, another reason why you get Kirk Cousins, a guy like a veteran like him, established passer, knows where to go with the ball for the most part, even when he's facing those blitzes. And obviously, as the game went on, he got, like we mentioned, more and more comfortable just dicing them up, especially with Drake London. And yeah, I mean, you can't put it lightly in regards to the fact that all these weapons that we've been waiting for. Even Darnell Mooney had a great game, but even without him, like you mentioned, Pitts, I think that tied with one of his best days. I think maybe fantasy wise, maybe not statistically, but I know that was definitely one of his better statistical games. So it was great to see all their weapons evolved. I know Bijan didn't really get involved, but I mean, once again, like we've said before, Bucks pretty good front seven, or at least front four as of right now. So no shock that he didn't. They were all over that. But yeah, Kirk Cousins, Falcons keeping it alive, 3-2. This was a big swing game for them, like we mentioned in our preview last week. So because now, like I said, they're both 3-2. Atlanta obviously has, I'm assuming, tiebreakers. I'm not exactly sure. Trying to blank, but
I mean, they would currently because they have the head-to-head. But obviously,
okay.
There's going to be a second game.
With the other division, and the other division game, they beat the Saints, by the way, the week before. That's what I was trying to remember. Yeah. So yeah, they probably do have the leg up on the Buccaneers in that regard. Because Falcons are the only divisional team that the Bucs have played thus far. But obviously, like you mentioned, they'll play again later. So we'll see. If the next matchup lives up to this one. This one's pretty good, even for a Thursday nighter, which they usually are not, to be honest. So anything else in this game before we move on to the Sunday games?
The only thing I would last want to add is I guess the Bucs running back situation is becoming very interesting just because, Bucky Irving has the fumble, so then it felt like they went a little bit more Rashad White in this one. He had that really big explosive run where he was ran for 50 or something like that. So I think it's pretty safe to say this Bucs running back room is probably very much becoming whoever the hot hand is. We're going to feed them. Both are probably going to be featured, but then at some point in the second half, whoever's looking better is probably going to get some of the more valuable touches.
Yeah, so it's important to keep an eye on that, especially if you're like John, you have some fantasy investment in one of those backs or in that backfield.
Sadly, because it's just become not great for either of them. You want one to take over for the most part.
We'll talk about it later. I made a disappointing drop. I had to choose between Bucky Irving and Tank Bigsby, and I dropped Tank Bigsby about a week or two ago. So, tough. Anyway, we'll get to that game later. Surprisingly, it's not the Jags that were in London this week, as we had that London game. It was the Minnesota Vikings and the Jets, and it was the Vikings getting the win over the Jets, 23-17. Obviously, we'll start with the game first because I feel like the bigger, obviously, news, especially as of today, is Robert Saleh fired. I'm assuming it was nice of them to let him back on the plane ride home. At least I had that decency. But we'll obviously talk about that in a minute. In regards to the game itself, though, Vikings, it wasn't an amazing offensive game that we've seen, but we saw, it feels like, and I'll throw it to you in a second, but it feels like there's just defenses showed. I did not watch this game live, but I did watch the condensed afterwards. But any thoughts here in regards to the Vikings staying perfect, John?
I was able to watch this one live as I woke up a lot earlier than I intended to and, couldn't go back to sleep. So, might as well tune into some early NFL football here. Simply put, Minnesota, once again, what they usually do, I saw some stat, or I didn't see, they said the stat on the broadcast that Minnesota, I think on the season going into that game, outscored opponents in the first quarter 36-3. And that's kind of been the tale of their season. And what do you know, in this game, they outscore the Jets 10-0 in that first quarter. The rest of the game, largely kind of went the Jets' way a little bit, but for the most part, even. But that first quarter was the difference maker because then in the second quarter, both teams score a touchdown. In the third quarter, the Jets score a field goal and they blank the Vikings. And in the fourth quarter, the Jets get 7, the Vikings get 6. So it's like the rest of the way, the Jets were kind of clawing back. The problem is, the Vikings are just really good at starting strong, and I think that comes down to Kevin O'Connell, like those scripted plays and being able to very much rely on the stuff they came in prepared for, and then the opposing team adjusts, but he's able to adjust alongside them so that they kind of even out. And so he's very much I think winning that coaching duel in the early slate. And so that's been a big reason as to why the Vikings are 5-0, and it continued to hold true here for them. And yet at the same time, in terms of offense, they really didn't have a great day. It was kind of just Justin Jefferson who really hurt the Jets, and then everybody else was just a tiny contributor. Now, it did unfortunately hurt them. I believe Aaron Jones did get banged up in this one and had to miss some time, and so they relied a little bit more on Ty Chandler, C.J. Ham, even Myles Gaskin, I think, got some touches here, to where Aaron Jones, for the most part, has kind of been a volume funnel for Minnesota and has been really good for them so far. But realistically, the Jets defense actually had a pretty solid day. It was just the offense, which has continued to be a problem. Breece Hall and Braylon Allen both were not able to get pretty much anything going on the ground against that Minnesota defense. And Aaron Rodgers just kind of forced some stuff. It felt like I know you're aware of this, obviously, as a Packers fan, watching Aaron and Devontae play for so long, but I remember that there was some quote from Devontae Adams talking about Aaron Rodgers, and he was talking about what Aaron expects on routes. I don't know if you ever saw this quote, but I'm sure you're aware of this. Aaron doesn't necessarily, it's not communicated, but let's say the route is a curl, and the corner very much so knows it's a curl and is going to bite underneath. Aaron might throw it kind of back over your shoulder and expect you to adjust and read what the corner does, similar to the way that he reads what the corner does. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
He very much wants, he understands the play is a curl, but I'm going to work and we're going to execute the curl, but I'm going to throw it into the open space. So that might not actually be a true curl because we both understand the corner read this. Here's where I'm going to throw it. And he wants his receivers to do that. Now, obviously, when you're a veteran receiver who's played with Aaron Rodgers for a long time, like an Allen Lazard, right? You might understand that. But this is the first time I've gotten to fully sit down and watch the Jets outside of that the 49ers game. And that was the first game of the season. So I didn't really see that much of this. But in this one, Aaron Rodgers is throwing the ball 54 times. And so it felt like a lot of these Rodgers throws to Garrett Wilson specifically, he's having those moments. And the reason I brought up the curl example was he literally had a curl route in which obviously the corner bites underneath and Rodgers kind of throws it over he's on the right sideline. He does the turn. Rodgers throws it kind of over his right shoulder, more on the inside and up towards the field. Garrett Wilson tries to adjust his body, but he clearly wasn't thinking that same way that Aaron Rodgers and maybe a Devontae Adams would from all that experience. And so he hadn't preemptively turned his body to adjust for it. And so he was just slightly too late on the movement. It's an incomplete pass. And it felt like there was just a lot of disconnected moments like that, specifically deep down the field. Because, for example, when you look at Garrett Wilson, he had 22 targets. He caught 13 of them for 101 yards. For 22 targets, only getting 101 yards. And I know that 100 yards in the air for a receiver is a fantastic day. I know that fantasy owners around the world were very happy that Garrett Wilson finally had his best game of the season. But considering that they're playing from behind the whole time, considering that it took 22 targets to get there, that's not really a great performance, especially when you realize that I think every single ball he caught was caught within 10 yards. His longest catch was 16, and I'm pretty sure a lot of that was after the catch from what I remember correctly. So, once again, it just feels like this passing offense, they're lacking explosiveness, and I think that's somewhat of an Aaron Rodgers thing when it comes to maybe his expectations on some of the receivers. I think it's obviously some of the receivers when it comes to their experience with Aaron Rodgers and sort of thinking the way he thinks and having to somewhat read his mind on some of these routes. And if they can get to that point and build that chemistry, then who knows? We might have another Rodgers, Devontae Adams-esque connection on our hands. But as of right now, that's not happening. And I honestly just don't think the play calling is creative enough to really overcome that. Once again, in a game where Braylon Allen and Breece Hall are completely stamped out, I'm waiting for creative ways to get them the ball because Tyler Conklin and Alan Lazard and Mike Williams at these points in some of these guys' careers are not guys that the Minnesota defense is scared of. You got to get Garrett Wilson going. You got to get Breece Hall going. You need those other guys to contribute. But when these guys are able to be taken out of the games, like we've seen every game this season, sometimes Breece Hall goes off, but Garrett Wilson does nothing. Sometimes Garrett Wilson, like in this game, goes off, but Breece Hall does nothing. We need both of them to be productive, and we need key contributors around. And all three of those things have not happened in the same game so far. And I feel like for Rodgers' case, he just got antsy in this one, and he started forcing stuff deep downfield that just simply wasn't there due to a variety of reasons, like I said, with the defense or just the disconnect. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say about the Jets. Robert Saleh obviously got fired, and I think it was somewhat of a solid decision. I think they should take Nathaniel Hackett with them. And, because, I don't know, it just feels like this Jets team has too much talent, and they can't seem to leverage it.
Yeah. I guess I'll start there with the offense. I mentioned this before. It's just very predictable right now. And like you alluded to, it's just a lot of shotgun, drop back, even the run game like we've seen, and it's become less and less even efficient, even compared to last year when everyone knew that their strength was going to be run the ball. And I'm sure everyone's seen the stat. I'm not going to point out the points thing because points doesn't always, stand for the same thing. Because I know there's a stat where, they had the same amount of points as did last year with Zach Wilson. Different year, different personnel. But as we saw in this game, any good defensive coordinator, and we saw especially like the Van Ginkel pick six really showed it. Like the good defensive coordinators, they know what Aaron Rodgers and Hackett really want to do in this West Coast offense. And yeah, it's one of the reasons why they're incredibly inefficient. You mentioned the Wilson. He had 101 yards, and you mentioned 13 receptions. That's when he does complete, because you mentioned also 22 targets. So if you think about it, targets per yard, or, if you average out in regards to targets and yards, like that's barely like 5 yards, if that, per time Rodgers is trying to throw to him. And then he's only converting about, 60, about 2/3 of that. So right. Yeah, in theory, kind of playing with fire there. And then like I said, they couldn't get the run game going. So and I would like, and I don't think it's going to happen because Nathaniel Hackett's still there and Aaron Rodgers seemingly still there. And I have to believe that. I'm not saying he's behind the firing, but I have to believe Rodgers, especially in regards to the offense at least, has a lot to say. And especially now that we've, as a Packer fan, we got to see the end of him, and I got to see us kind of move on. And I think what I've seen is, and what the Jets are lacking, a lot of and a lot of good teams do nowadays is different personnel sets, especially in run game. A little more in the center, like we've seen, like the Packers, even like the 49ers, the better teams. Like they get the run game going with that, and then the play action off that. The Jets, I haven't seen, if I recall, any sort of play action like threat in regards to an actual big play off, and that's where majority of teams are getting their big plays, explosive plays, like you mentioned from. So yeah, and then that just leads to, as we've seen, as alluded to a little bit in regards to how they're covering the receivers, kind of just sitting and almost daring Rodgers to throw deep on them. And as we saw, also you mentioned that in completion, but also with the pick, I think that sealed the game, if I remember correctly. Also is a poorly thrown ball by Aaron. Says Stephon Gilmore. I think he was going for maybe Garrett Wilson or maybe Mike Williams. Regardless, it was like, kind of like supposed to be, I think, back shoulder. It was like one of those few times he threw the sideline, and, they were all over that. So, and on top of all the confusing stuff that Minnesota does. So once he's, like I said, kudos to them. But I think that's just something the Jets are going to have to figure out, because Aaron's going to have days like we saw a couple weeks ago that I know Jets fans loved when he diced up the Patriots, but it's not going to happen every week. And a lot of that style is dependent upon, like you alluded to, John, just Rodgers and the wide receivers. Can they be basically almost perfect for most of the, can they be in sync for most of the game? And oftentimes, especially against good defenses, that's not going to be the case. So I will say, even if they get Davante Adams, I'm not sure if that fully solves this issue, because I just feel like it may make things a little bit better, but especially against, we're talking about this team being a playoff team and they're only one game away from the division race or lead, that could happen. But I think, like you said, I think they really need to get the run game going. They need to kind of take a book, basically, to sum it all up, out of what the Bucs did with Brady when they won that year. Because remember, they started off to a slow start, and then they started, incorporating more tight ends because Tom, was very similar to Aaron, wanted to get the ball out of his hands quickly. No, we got you, Brady. Like, we're going to protect, sometimes we're going to get the run game going, but then we'll take our shots and max protect. Then you can try to take a shot there, and you only make life easier. But, I'm not sure if that will actually happen because of just seems like this is what Rodgers wants, him and Nathaniel Hackett. And obviously, like you mentioned, they're still there. So we'll see what happens. Maybe just the coaching change will ignite them going forward. Because as I'm sure you've seen, like the defense was really good for the Jets. I know they weren't amazing, but they are a top 10 defense statistically in almost every category. And especially like you mentioned, this game, they held down the Vikings offense, which was rolling for the most part. And unfortunately, even one of those is a pick six. So technically, their offense outscored the Vikings offense in a sense, or at least equalized it. But unfortunately, it doesn't matter here. So, it'll be interesting to see what the Jets do or how this plays out going forward. We know what they're going to do. As I forget their DC's name, but he's their interim head coach now that Saleh is unfortunately let go and gone. But I am with you. I understand the firing. A little bit early in my opinion, but I understand it overall. Especially if you look at Saleh's overall record, it's not really great anyway.
I'll add too, the reason I understand it too is I still have not gotten over the whole fiasco of the constant swapping of quarterbacks last year. It was just ridiculous. And I don't know. Ever since that, I just kind of had a bad taste in my mouth around Robert Saleh because it's like, make up your mind. Do you want Zach Wilson or not? You're constantly blaming the guy for all the problems, blah, blah, blah. Oh, now you have Aaron Rodgers, and yet the offense still isn't looking good. So, like, I'm not sitting here and saying Zach Wilson, was some stud, but, like, it just seemed ridiculous how much of the focus was on the quarterback from the coaching perspective last year.
Well, yeah, and like you're saying, like, he got his chance with his quote-unquote a guy he drafted, and Zach Wilson didn't handle it well, didn't work out. And then it's not going well with Rodgers right now, and they have this maybe the timeline's short, so it's understandable that they make this move. But like I am with you, I would have preferred if I were a Jet fan. I'm not, but if I would have preferred that maybe Hackett be the one let go as well. But I'm assuming probably once again that would not be allowed on Aaron's watch. I don't know. I'm just once again that's just a general assumption that I know I am not the only one making that. So. Anyway, big win for the Vikings. They stay 5-0. Jets fall to 2-3, but the world's not over yet for them. As like I said, they're still in the thick of the division for themselves. So they got a Monday night game, so they got extra time to prepare with their new interim head coach to kind of turn their season around there, even though it's not terrible at 2-3. But anyway, that is Jets Vikings. Obviously, Vikings win. Let's go on to what was and actually lived up to the hype. One of the few games where we say, man, this is going to be a great game. Why is it on the noon slot? Sometimes they don't live up to the hype. This one did, as the Baltimore Ravens needed overtime to beat the Cincinnati Bengals on the road, 41-38. Although, as I'm sure you'll go over or I'll go over, like there are opportunities for the Bengals to win this game, and they were leading too late in the fourth. But Ravens kind of not really much of a comeback. It was one possession game, but came back, forced overtime, and overcame some things there. So what were your thoughts here in regards to the Bengals the Ravens getting this big win?
Watching this game, I was sitting here being like, man, there's just something Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and this offense just understand about the way that the Ravens play defensively, because it feels like every year this happens. Every year it feels like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase absolutely torch the Baltimore Ravens defense. And yet, luckily for the Ravens this time, it didn't come back to bite them. They actually managed to win the game. And so major kudos to the Baltimore Ravens here. Lamar Jackson had a heck of a day, despite the fact that outside of Zay Flowers with his 111 yards, there really wasn't a standout receiver. It was just getting a lot of people involved. I mean, the fact that Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman, and Charlie Kohler are able to all have over 50 yards is a testament to how well Lamar was spreading the ball around. And then that touchdown to Isaiah Likely at the end of the game, at the end of the fourth quarter, was one of the better touchdowns I've seen in quite a long time, of Lamar running the sideline, navigating traffic, almost getting sacked, and then managing to make that throw to Likely. It was a heck of a play, and shows kind of the freak athlete that Likely is and the red zone threat that he can be. A very resilient win from the Baltimore Ravens, and I think the thing that stood out to me about this one was historically Baltimore was not built to play like this and win these kind of games. When opposing teams, and we've seen it in the past, like Cincinnati, would take big leads like them offensively in these kind of games, Baltimore wasn't able to do anything about it because they've been so run heavy. And yet in this one, Lamar with the arm was able to do it. And once again, it's not with a list of stud receivers and tight ends and all this kind of stuff. Like, obviously, we've been very high on Mark Andrews for a long time, but he hasn't really done much this year. This is his best game of the year. It's only 4 catches, 55 yards. Charlie Kohler, I'm pretty sure, is their 3rd string tight end, and he had 3 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown. So shout out to the Ravens because they've definitely, I think, not only come back from this 0-2 hole, obviously, but they've started to figure out how to win in more ways that previously they typically weren't. For the Bengals, this is an absolute heartbreaker. They had their chance. They obviously the extra point, or sorry, not the extra point, the field goal got blocked, and here we are. I believe Zach Moss sustained an injury. From what I've read, it's not going to be anything serious. So at most, he probably misses a game, if any time at all. But Chase Brown did get more involved in this one. I thought it was once again good. Chase Brown does seem to look better. He didn't have a great game in this one, but he did look better than Zach Moss. He did score a touchdown once again. T. Higgins is continuing to look really strong. This is back-to-back weeks in which he's led the team in targets. He had a great day. And so the Bengals, it felt like offensively got back on track, but the big concern we had coming into the season was their defense. And that was, once again, kind of what killed them.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned it. We saw against the Commanders. I think you mentioned here against the Ravens, and even then, like, I guess to give the Bengals a little bit of credit, like for the most part, they sold out on stopping the run. But like you alluded to, it seemed like Baltimore was ready for that, and that was able to have extra wrinkles, like we've mentioned, criticized before, and got their passing game going in spite of that, and then so we're still patient with the run in overtime because that obviously set up the game-winning field goal. Yeah, for the Bengals, it's like you mentioned with how poor their defense is. Like, this is gonna probably have to be a pretty weekly thing. Is like, I'm not saying they're gonna throw for 4 or 5 touchdowns every game, but it's gonna have to be a very similar style where they're gonna have to just basically try to outscore and not mess up, because unfortunately, like, they were up 3 with about 5.5 minutes left in Baltimore territory, and that's when Burrow threw that pick, which was kind of a really good catch. I don't know. I guess it's a little bit ahead of Jamar Chase. Regardless, great pick by Marlon Humphrey, and then that gave the Ravens life and the ability to go down, tie it up, and go to regulation. And then even then, like, it looked like the Ravens were really fumbling the game away, because then Lamar had that as they get into Cincinnati territory. I'm sure as you saw too, and others didn't though. Lamar had that weird fumble off the snap, and then the Bengals get it. And like you mentioned, unfortunately, the field goal is no good. Looked like also the holder had issues too. Despite that, like, the holder didn't bobbled the snap as well. So just all sorts of a mess there in Cincinnati. And then, obviously Henry just rips off literally first play from scrimmage, that 50-yard run. And he apparently said, too, he thought he didn't know that there was someone chasing or as close. So he thought, he kind of let up. So he could have just really ran in and ended it there. Not that it mattered, though, because Justin Tucker, 30 yards is money, even though he's, I'm sure you mentioned. I know we mentioned before. Doesn't Tucker miss a couple of kicks this year? So important thing to watch out. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if the Bengals can figure this out, because as always, the Bengals start slow. But man, this is not, like, I don't care if you start slow. It's just still not good, and not a good recipe going forward. That your defense has all these issues we've mentioned. I mean, outside Trey Hendrickson, no one on the front 4 that really scares you. We mentioned there's concerns about their run defense. Seems like they tried to overcorrect that, but in doing so, Lamar had a field day on them, like you mentioned. So, great gritty win for the Ravens. They needed that, just to keep this kind of streak alive after starting off slow, 0-2. 2 tough losses against the Chiefs and Raiders. They've bounced back in the past 3 weeks. So, very interesting showdown they have next week against the Commanders, who we'll go over in a second. But anything else you wanted to mention or throw in there before we move on?
Nope.
Okay. Let's do this one. Will be a little more cut and dry. We'll see though. As the Washington Commanders, they beat the Cleveland Browns 34-13, and the Browns didn't score that touchdown until in the fourth quarter. The game's already decided 34-6. So, this was Commanders all the way here. Jane Daniels continues to just build upon, I guess, an impressive resume. Even though we here strongly believe that wins are not a quarterback stat, he made some great plays. More of a team effort this time, but he's getting all the glory, it seems like, on social media. But your thoughts here on your division rivals here, Commanders, starting 4-1, getting the big win against Cleveland.
Washington's looking good, but it is tough for me to focus a lot on them when, man, Cleveland once again just looks bad. They look lost, even defensively this year. That's kind of been their thing the last couple of years, was that defense. And defensively, they can't really slow down much of anything. Jaden Daniels was able to have a great day. He did throw an interception, but still he was able to absolutely dice him up for the most part, and had a big impact on the ground game rushing. Austin Eckler had a 50-yard rush. Jerry McNichols had a 28-yard rush. Like, they were just allowing a lot of explosive plays to happen. And speaking of explosive plays, Terry McLaurin has that 66-yard catch. Diami Brown has that 41-yard touchdown. And then Eckler, speaking of him, also had a 33-yard catch. So it's like Cleveland's defense has not been good. Offensively, they're still bad. Once again, Amari Cooper, a lot of targets, not a lot of production, pretty much nothing else outside of that in terms of the passing game. The run game was okay, but they're playing from behind for the most part, so it's like it was just kind of useless. I don't know where Cleveland goes from here. I don't know how you fix this, because they're 1-4 now. They can't really score on anybody. They can't stop anybody. They can't run the ball that effectively. They can't pass the ball that effectively. Feels like no other weapon outside of Amari Cooper really has much of an impact usually, and even Amari Cooper, like I said, is largely inefficient with the targets he gets. And that could be a Watson issue. That could be a Cooper issue. I haven't necessarily paid attention too closely to know. It's probably a mixture of both. So, yeah, I don't know. Cleveland is just such a mess that this was just kind of a routine win for Washington. They're looking good, and credit to them, because this was definitely a team that in the past was not winning these kind of routine games that they should be winning. But now they're sitting at 4-1, and on the opposite side, Cleveland is just looking like an absolute mess.
Yeah, just a comment on the game, because there's not much else to say. Like, Washington, also kudos to Cliff Kingsbury and them, been able to get the run game going, which he did do a bit in Arizona, but as we saw as time went on, it kind of fell off. So once again, good for him. But as we said before, let's keep an eye on it. We're not gonna, we'll see if how long this can go, or if this is sustainable. For Cleveland, like, even if Nick Chubb comes back, like, I'm not sure if that's going to save the season itself. In my opinion, I think honestly I would have already made the switch, but I hear it this week is at the Eagles, but it feels like this is it. Like, this in theory, this next week should be it. Like, hey, like, if Deshaun doesn't have a good performance at the very least here, the offense doesn't work, because Deshaun took 7 sacks too, and it's not that the Cleveland line is absolutely terrible. I think a little bit is that Deshaun Watson's just, like we said before, he's not the same guy, and a little bit watching the rush too much, and his feel for the game seems to be lost. That that he once, it was one of his greatest strengths, was being able to improvise and all that such. So I don't know how to fix that. Maybe, like I said, I'm not saying you bench him permanently if it doesn't go well next week. Obviously they have to keep paying him, so probably not. But you may have to, maybe you throw in a Jameis for a week or two just to see. Carolina literally as well, kind of, we saw make even more gutsier change because the number 1 overall pick, and they're in rebuild, so there's more reason to play him. While Watson, just not very impressive at this point. And like we've said before, it just seems like he's never going to be the same guy as he was now. So we'll see. But yeah, good for the Commanders here. I had them as the worst team in the NFC East, so I was obviously wrong there, as they are cooking at this point, getting everybody involved. And yeah, for Cleveland, like you said, a lot of questions on both sides of the ball. Like, the defense, we know is talented. I feel like the defense has been like pressing too much. It's always been a Jim Schwartz thing. He's always been a bit over aggressive, and I feel like it's even more to a T this year, probably because he's like, man, we got to help out the offense. I got to create a turnover here or such, and like trying to force things to happen a little bit too much, and then that's leading to, like you said, some of these bigger bombs to Jerry McLaurin, De'Ami Brown, etc. So Cleveland's got a tough stretch coming up too. So I'm not sure if, I'm not very optimistic that Watson will turn it around or that Jameis will do that great. It'd be interesting though how they play that out, just for that sake, because next week is at Eagles, but the week after is against the Bengals. That's why I'm like, I would assume you make the switch maybe then at home, or maybe Watson's on a short leash for the Bengals game. Doesn't have a great first half, you pull him, because we know that Bengals defense is suspect, and it's a division game, so that's big too. So we'll see, obviously, how they handle the situation going forward. I'm not going to sit here and say fire Kevin Stefanski, because I don't think he really is the issue. At least at this point, maybe at the end of the year, we'll revisit that. But as of right now, like this is the bed they made, and it's gone worst case scenario basically for the Browns. So we'll see how they handle that and if they can turn it all around while the Commanders are rolling. It's that weird thing where at this point of the season, if you had told at least me, I would have expected the records to be flipped. I'd be more
same.
Right? Yeah, we would expect the Browns to be 4-1 and the Commanders to be 1-4, but here we are. Welcome to the NFL. It's not. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to add before we move on?
No. I miss Dan Quinn.
All right. yeah. He's got that defense going too. Kudos to him. I forgot to mention that. Like I mentioned lack of pass rushers. He's got that defense flying around. Bobby Wagner, forced a fumble.
That's what he does. Well. Listen, Dan Quinn, you can have a lot of things you can say about that man, but I literally witnessed Dallas go from the second worst defense in franchise history to a top 5 defense in the NFL. Obviously, they added a guy like Micah Parsons, but didn't have a lot of pass rushers, all this kind of stuff either. And the man makes magic work. He will find people like Dorrance Armstrong out of nowhere, and it works. So,
yeah. Anyhow, let's move on to another game. That was a really big game in the AFC, and it was the Houston Texans getting the win over the Buffalo Bills, 23-20. Stephon Diggs kind of revenge game per se here, as Fairbairn hit the game-winning field goal as time expired. What were your thoughts here in regards to the Texans getting the win over the Bills?
This was definitely an entertaining game. The one thing that I noticed when watching this one in terms of the Buffalo passing attack is with Khalil Shakir out, it definitely felt like they didn't have like that go-to target to kind of keep the chains moving, all that kind of stuff. Like obviously we got our one big play from Keon Coleman that we get every game. Kincaid was okay, but hasn't really ascended to like a true consistent target for Josh Allen. The whole passing attack, it just seemed like there wasn't like a reliable option. And Shakir has been that guy on the season so far. And in this game, without him, it just seemed like the passing attack just looked a little disconnected. Like they needed that one more piece that could kind of tie everything together on a lot of these drives. And he just, with some of the explosive plays that we were getting, because, we had 4 different receivers get a catch over 20 yards. So we had some explosive plays. It was just, like I said, we didn't have like that kind of connective tissue. So I'm not too worried about Buffalo. Ultimately, I still thought they played a solid game. I thought they did, pretty decently defensively. Now, unfortunately, Nico Collins did get hurt, and he was having a heck of a day before he did get hurt. So who knows how they would have performed had he not. But I thought Buffalo's defense was decent. They were able to turn C.J. Stroud over twice. It just felt like they were just not quite there enough with the passing attack in this one to overcome Houston. And meanwhile, for the Texans, they just keep finding ways to win. Like I said, Nico Collins got hurt. They kept rolling. No Joe Mixon for the last couple of weeks. They continue to keep rolling. So Houston is looking really strong. And this was definitely, I think, a marquee win for them on the season, being a team like the Bills.
Yeah. I just want to add in regards to Buffalo. Like I think I mentioned before, I'm very concerned about lack of, even with Shakir there, which I think maybe it's a different result. But as we see against some of the elite AFC teams, like it can't just be on Josh Allen and really James Cook. I know they try to be patient with him, but yeah, like we alluded to kind of in the preseason, like is there someone that really scares you? Because even the Keon Coleman, I know it was a big play statistically, 1 for 49, but it was like more like a 15-yard play. Then he had a couple broken tackles, and then he took the rest of the house. But yeah, and once again, maybe he can be that guy more consistently. As of right now, it doesn't, especially that game, didn't really inspire much confidence in that. But hopefully they get Khalil Shakir back. But regardless, like it'd be interesting to see because this would be one of the spots where I was like, okay, this is a very, at least on paper, on the field, a very good Devontae Adams spot. Once again, I'm not sure if they have the money because also there's that cap space stuff. You have to figure out with him. But I think this would be a great spot if they can swing it. We'll see though, because Buffalo, last time they traded for a wide receiver, it worked out for the most part, I guess you would say, and then he left. So, and that was Stephon Diggs. So, good win for the Texans. It was a tough, gritty one, and honestly, they should have been in more control too, because most of those turnovers were late by Stroud. I know the interception was in the fourth quarter at the beginning. I think they're already in Buffalo territory there, so that could have been worse. And then the same with the fumbles, like the next very next drive, and that was strip sack. So kudos. And even then, it kind of goes shows how bad the Buffalo offense was. I didn't realize the strip sack was like at the Houston 14, so Buffalo was already in the red zone, and they got nothing.
Yeah.
They got a field goal, but they got 0 yards. They couldn't do anything the next 3 plays. So, and maybe too, just to add last point, maybe Josh Allen was concussed. I don't know at the end there, and I wouldn't be shocked if the NFL just kind of keeps that hush hush quiet because I don't seem like I don't. Probably should have gone through a concussion protocol, but did. But hopefully, he seemed to be okay. They gave him smelling salts. I don't know if that's a fix, but it worked for him. Anyhow, Texans get the win there. Big AFC win for them. Staying in the Texans division, let's go to a team that got their first win. They're officially no more winless teams now. As congrats to the Jaguars for finally getting that win, as we all would have expected. Honestly, if they had lost, I think we all expected Doug Peterson maybe to be fired today. Who knows? But they get the win 37-34 over the Colts. What were your thoughts here in regards to the Jags finally getting over the hump?
First off, this might quell some of your Tank Bigsby regrets. I do want to talk about the Tank Bigsby ETN thing. According to Doug Peterson, ETN got the shoulder injury at some point a couple weeks ago. Or maybe it was last week. I can't remember exactly when it was, but got that shoulder injury, right? Apparently, Travis got a stinger in this one on the same shoulder, and that was why they sort of kept him out in the second half specifically. Doug Peterson is quoted saying, no, Travis, the question was in reference to, is Tank Bigsby going to get an increased workload? And Doug said, no, Travis is our guy. Tank had a good game, but that's just the way the games go. Happy for Tank. Great for the offensive line, obviously, in some of those situations there. Travis is our guy. Tank had a good game today, though. So take that for what you will, I guess. We'll see, because coach speak largely means nothing. It depends on what happens on the actual product of the field. But at the least, Tank Bigsby has started to show, considering that he did have a pretty good day. 2 touchdowns, a 65-yard run. The first touchdown he had was some great power there. That he at the very least probably does deserve to get more involved because he had a really solid performance overall. This was a good win for Jacksonville because they certainly need to show some resiliency, especially considering that their defense absolutely crumbled in that fourth quarter. So it was nice to see that offensively they were able to sort of match the tempo that Indianapolis was up to. For the Colts, Joe Flacco was cooking. No Jonathan Taylor, no Anthony Richardson. It seemed like no problem, as Alec Pierce was able to have some huge plays. Josh Downs looked really good. Adonai Mitchell had a decent performance. Not a ton of Michael Pittman, but he did get a touchdown there and was solid. And then Trey Sermon pitched in and got a tutty as well. So, I mean, the Colts offensively look good, but, the Colts defense continues to be a problem. Their run defense specifically continues to be a problem, as I think maybe 3 or 4 out of their 5 games they've allowed a 100-yard rusher. For the Colts, it seems like if they want to win, these are the kind of games they're going to have to be in, which is interesting because at least I think the last 2 weeks their defense was actually decent. But at the same time, we'll talk about some of those opponents later. It might have just been who they were playing and the state of the offenses that were over there. This is a big win for Jacksonville. And like you said, this might have saved Doug Peterson's job because, quite frankly, if they were 0-5 and all of a sudden you see the Jets are already moving on, I wouldn't have been surprised if Jacksonville maybe said the same thing. Oh, and final thing, Brian Thomas Jr. looking like already potentially becoming a superstar level receiver. They were, airing it out this time a little bit more than previous games, but he is quickly establishing himself as the alpha in that room.
Yeah, enough down that point. And I maybe sound like a Gabe Davis hater, but stop with he's the wide receiver one. Stop putting Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk the first few weeks. They would do that where they would, and I'm sure you saw sub Brian Thomas out for a bit, and then okay, we got to play for Gabe Davis. Oh, Gabe Davis dropped the ball, or Trevor missed them. So kudos on top of that to Trevor Lawrence. Apparently it was his birthday, I think, that day as well. But nonetheless, he needed a performance like this also because, and rightly so, he was under a lot of fire because gave him that big contract, and it was not the start you wanted to the season, even statistically as well for him. For not much to say else in the Colts in regards to you already hit their defense kind of poor, obviously missing key pieces in Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson, although like you said, Flacco, he's shown that he can still operate this offense, but also with no Jonathan Taylor, they never got their run game going. And it's part of the reason why Flacco got sacked 4 times, and one of those was a crucial strip sack at the end of the first half that gave the Jaguars were able to get a field goal off of. So kudos to them. Only other thing I want to note, and this is once again the Doug Peterson criticism, little too over aggressive. I'm just going to say I did with Brandon Staley. I'm going to do it with Doug Peterson. Very first offensive drive. I know it's 4th and 2, but I don't know. Take your points anyway. It didn't cost them very much at the end, but maybe would have been a little more comfortable game. And especially, but nonetheless, kudos to the Jags. They get their first win at home, get off the proverbial hump there, and hopefully can move forward and try to get back in the AFC playoff race from here. But we'll see, because like we said with the Bengals, tough when you're already behind the 8 ball at this point. But anyway, let's move on over to the NFC. This game wasn't really much of a contest, as it was the Chicago Bears beating the Carolina Panthers 36-10 in Chicago. Your thoughts here, John, in regards to the Bears basically just dominating the Panthers?
Panthers kind of came back down to earth a little bit in terms of their offensive production. The Bears defense is good. I kind of expected this to happen potentially in this game. Chuba Hubbard was able to have a decent day, but for the most part, you're playing from behind, and that's kind of what I want to talk about on this one, because this was the first game where it really felt like Caleb Williams was living up to all the hype that was given to him in the pre-draft process. Now, I'm not going to sit here and, crown the guy, because it was the Carolina Panthers who, a lot of people would argue is the worst team in the entire NFL. So, this should be a team that you're expected to do good against, especially since the Panthers defense is also not great. But still, kudos to Caleb, because he had a fantastic day. That thing that I kept talking about, which was it felt like we weren't getting a lot of explosive plays out of him, combined with the ability to not turn the ball over. It happened in this one. He had no turnovers, but he was able to connect with DJ Moore a couple times on some big plays. Cole Kmet had a pretty explosive one. DeAndre Swift has really turned it around after the start to his season. He was still somewhat inefficient, but has been able to actually provide them somewhat of a run game now, and was solid too when it came to the receiving game as well. So, yeah, it's really felt like the Chicago passing offense is finally starting to get going, and that's without even Rome Odunze outside of that one big game he had, having huge games. That's without Keenan Allen really doing much so far. So, yeah, it's nice to see that the chemistry between him and DJ Moore is really starting to, be cemented, and I think the Chicago offense and the Chicago fans can probably look forward to potentially a lot better season than maybe they were expecting, after the first couple games, because the defense is still playing as good as they were to start the season, but the offense is kind of finally catching up.
Yeah, I don't mean to poo-poo on the Bears. Great performance, but I am keeping an eye on that offense. Shane Waldron. I don't know if you saw who was. I think it was Jackson Smith-Njigba. He pulled a Kingsbury in regards to, and showed was saying good luck to those in the Bears offense. Showed the route trees that he would run with Shane Waldron, which is not very great. And then obviously the different route trees now, and people have already made that comparison, but at least before the game, because it's at least for DJ Moore. But nonetheless, they're figuring it out, like you mentioned. I think the big thing is obviously getting the run game going. Helps any quarterback, especially a young rookie. And like we said, like I've said, especially all the explosive plays and such are off play action. And not that all of them were in this game, but obviously helps when you have that threat. And kudos to the Bears staying perfect at home here. And like you mentioned, their defense pretty awesome in regards to that as well. And that helps. And then, no shock to Carolina. Like you said, finally came back to earth. It was interesting. I'm not saying that they're going to bring him back soon, but I think it was good that, Bryce Young got a little bit of game time there at the end. We'll see how they handle the situation going forward. But big win for the Bears, as we'll keep going over a few other NFC North teams that we'll go over. But they are one of the whole NFC North above 500. So at least as of right now, obviously it's only week 5, so things will change. But kudos to the Bears fans. I'm sure they're feeling pretty good that they haven't felt this long in a long time. I think the last, I don't know any Bears fans. I wonder if they were more, what was better, the Mitch Trubisky at this time? The 1 year, remember, they went crazy. That was that year a real hopeful year? Was it, did it have to go all the way back to last time they had hope was Jay Cutler? I'm trying to think.
They definitely had to have hope about Trubisky, because the guy
because Nagy
made
and
a
they had
Pro Bowl 1 year, which I know was because of alternates and all that stuff. But come on,
and they did and they had Khalil Mack, and they had a lot of hope there, unfortunately. But anyway, we'll see if that can continue for them and Caleb Williams, like I said. So they get the impressive win over the Panthers. Not much else to say there. I don't imagine we have much to say in regards to this one. We didn't in regards to previews. But anyway, the Dolphins, they get the win 15-10 over the Patriots. Is a big win, I will say, before I throw it to you, in regards to the fact that kind of keeps hope alive, especially if Tua does come back, which it seemingly sounds like he will. Don't know the timetable, but at least keeps their playoff hopes, at least, like I said, keeps the flame alive a bit here. But any thoughts, if any, in regards to the Dolphins getting the win over the Patriots?
I mean, it keeps it alive, but it still just feels like the issues that this team has are a lot bigger than just Tua. You plug Tua in, it's not going to all of a sudden fix all the problems because, I don't know. I still didn't love what I saw out of them defensively. Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson were able to have a solid performance. Realistically, like, the Patriots, honestly, in my opinion, should have scored more points here, but they just kind of left some meat on the bone, if you will. And then for Miami, like, they were actually able to move the ball this time, which is good, but the Patriots have shown that they can allow teams to move the ball. It's not like they have the greatest defense in the world. So I don't know. I don't really know what to take away from this one because New England just looks like a mess. Not in terms of like, oh, they're making a ton of turnovers or whatever, but they just can't seem to put it all together in terms of like getting touchdowns. And then for Miami, I mean, they weren't as big of a mess, and I guess it was nice that like you got Jalen Wright going, especially after Raheem Mostert went down with injury, and Devon Achane is already out with injury as well. So that was nice that you got Jalen Wright going, but I don't know. Miami still feels messy, but at 2-3, maybe Tua comes back. Who knows?
Yeah, we'll see. Not much else to add there for me. I do want to add too, though. Patriots, be interesting to see because now they, as of today, looks like they're going to be starting Drake May this upcoming week. We'll talk about that more. The only thing I want to add to in regards to the game was just unfortunate too because they did have a chance there at the end. And I guess Jalen Polk was initially ruled a touchdown on the field, but it was obviously, I believe, overturned. Because it was the whole, I don't know if you saw the play, but I guess he got the toe in, but because he completely stepped and the heel was second, it was just a weird thing. And I don't know, that's one where I'm not sure about that rule. I mean, I don't know, because the other way, I don't know. Anyway, he technically got two toes in, a second toe in, but because he was like going in or stepping out backwards, like I said, so it could have been a very different game, very different result if he didn't do so. So we'll see though if Drake May will maybe inspire more out of this offense or this team in general. But yeah, if the Dolphins survive and advance, and that's what they do here as they get a crucial win, like we mentioned. So now we move to the afternoon games, and let's start with one of the stunners, and it was the Arizona Cardinals. They beat the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco 24-23 here, John. What were your thoughts on this big upset?
Well, when you talk about, you got to win all three phases, it really felt like Arizona in this one was able to do it. And I know that that's interesting considering that they did allow that blocked field goal for a touchdown. So in terms of special teams, that was somewhat of a failure there. But Arizona was resilient in this one. Like, I got to give a credit to their defense because if we take away the blocked field goal, that led to the touchdown, they only gave up about 17 points, and they were opportunistic. They picked off Brock Purdy right to start the second half after they punted on 3-and-out. That results in a field goal because it put them immediately in the red zone, and they didn't do anything off it. They got 4 plays for a total of 1 yard, so that gives them 3 points right there. Then the next drive, San Francisco drives down the field. That's an 11-play drive. They burn 7 minutes. They managed to turn them over on downs, so that's a big performance there. The drive after that, they force a fumble after a long 61-yard drive, and then the drive after that to end the game, they get an interception to end it there. So shout out to the Arizona defense because they played fantastic in this one, and good on the offense for staying resilient. I had worries about Arizona in this game because to start the game, they started it like they have a couple of these games where all of a sudden immediately first drive, touchdown. Kyler Murray goes for that 50-yard run, and boom, tutty. And I'm sitting here thinking, all right, Arizona, once again, let's start off strong. Then they punt. Then they get a field goal. Then they get the blocked field goal for a touchdown. Then they throw an interception in that first half. And I was like, oh, no. Because this is kind of how Arizona felt. It felt like they were starting off strong immediately. And then once the scripted stuff was off the board, like I was giving credit to the Vikings for all the scripted stuff, once that stuff was off the board, unlike the Vikings, it felt like they weren't adjusting along with the opposing defense once they, kind of figure out what the offense is doing. Well, in this one, they finally were able to do. I don't know what, Gannon was talking about at halftime, but it really felt like they were a completely different team in that second half, because not only they get a shutout in the second half defensively, but they were able to come back and get a couple well, it wasn't a couple touchdowns, because they got 2 field goals and then they got the 2-point conversion. But yeah, overall, I mean, shout out to Arizona, because it felt like, once again, years past, not a game that they would win, especially against San Francisco, a divisional rival, in the ways that they would. I believe even in Kyle Shanahan's career, they flashed something of like, what his win percentage
like
when he was the lead.
Oh, when you had a 10-point lead in the fourth.
Yeah, and in this one they lost. So really good win for the Cardinals. Puts them at 2-3. Definitely makes the division a lot more interesting, because if you lose this one, you're sitting at 1-4, along with a team like Cincinnati, and San Francisco sitting at 3-2. You got Seattle over there. Things all of a sudden are a lot more of a hill to climb, even with tiebreakers at the end of the year. But now you're both sitting at 2-3, and I feel like Arizona is kind of firmly in that mix, because I mean, even thinking back to the Buffalo game, right? Like, there were other games that they were close. They could have won some of those games, had a few extra plays gone their way. So shout out to the Cardinals, because they're definitely looking feisty. I will add one thing. It felt like in this game, Marvin Harrison Jr. was able to be taken away. And I don't know if that was the Niners defensive scheme, because I was watching Red Zone, so I was peeking in and out of this one. I don't know if that was the Niners defensive scheme. I don't know if it was Marvin Harrison Jr. I don't know if it was Kyler. I don't know what it was, but they were able to make him pretty much ineffective throughout this game, outside of that one crazy play where Kyler was getting blitzed and he just heaved it up to the sideline and Marvin made a heck of a catch. So that was good. But because of that, the thing that we've kind of been looking for, once again, Trey McBride, he's back from injury. That was huge, because I talked about how I feel like they didn't have a presence over the middle. But they had Michael Wilson step up, and I think that bodes really big things for this offense, because we know James Conner can run the ball effectively. We know that when Trey McBride's healthy, they've got a solid option over the middle. We know that Marvin Harrison can make special plays on the outside, but they need another guy. And sometimes that other guy can be Greg Dortch, but maybe now sometimes that other guy can be Michael Wilson. I think if you have that balance of both, then this Arizona offense can definitely, do some interesting things. And I said I only had to add one more thing, but one other final thing, because I did mention this last week. I wanted to see Kyler Murray run the ball more. He ran the ball 7 times this game compared to last game where he only ran it 1 time. And I'm just saying, Kyler Murray, when he runs the ball, it feels like it's the added game-changing effect to this offense that they truly need.
Yeah, I concur. I just want to add in regards to the Niners, good to see Ayuk got going at least. That's one of the few things. It was unfortunate, too. Their kicker got hurt on a kickoff tackle.
Honestly, if he doesn't get hurt, they might have won the game.
Because they don't have to go for it on that. On
it's like 4th and 30 or whatever.
It was 4th and 23, and they couldn't even punt it. So it's like, well, might as well try to get the conversion, regardless. And they almost actually converted it too. I think the ball got knocked out of Kill's hands. But anyway, so that obviously sucks. I mean, the other 2 turnovers, though, credit to Arizona, especially the fumble, because that felt like that was the go-to put it away drive, and they were it was like 1st and goal, and then fortunately Jordan Mason fumbles, and then even the interception, like Brock Purdy got hit as well, and obviously ball flies up, and Kazir White, I believe, came up with it. So yeah, kudos to the Cardinals for kind of sticking with it, and the Niners. This is tough, because this is just like the Rams game. They were in control for most of it. Now this one's a little bit of an excuse that your kicker, obviously got hurt, but nonetheless, this is trouble potentially for the Niners. We mentioned it too, like especially losing some of those defensive pieces, as we saw late in the game, could come back to bite them. We'll see if Christian McCaffrey comes back, because apparently there's a couple reports. If all goes well, there's no setbacks, but he could be back, I think, in a couple of weeks or so. But we'll see what happens there. As it seems like they kind of need him regardless. They got to clean things up going forward. But like you said, makes the NFC West definitely more interesting going forward, as both these teams now tied at 2-3. Especially the Niners, as we perceive them as one of the top of the NFC, but we'll see if they can be up there in the top, trying to get home field advantage in the year if they can dig themselves out of this hole. So big win for the Cardinals. Kudos to them for being a division rival, staying in division matchups. Next one was not very close as the previous one, as the Denver Broncos at home, get their first home win, ironically, of the year. Beat the Raiders 34-18 pretty convincingly. As the Raiders, they tried to both Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew. It didn't seem like either was really going to help, regardless. Although they did start hot with that Brock Bowers, I think, a crazy touchdown catch. But otherwise, John, Broncos were in charge here. They win. What were your thoughts in regards to this one?
I feel like the Raiders had that early momentum. Like you said, Brock Bowers gets that big touchdown catch. Then they get a field goal. They're driving down in a situation in which I think it would have been 17-3 if they score here. They're like on the 6 or 7 yard line. Minshew rolls out. He's got Bowers right in front of him open, like 3 yards ahead of him. And I'm thinking, that's your tight end. You get him the ball there. He could even muscle that in for a touchdown. Jacoby Myers kind of right behind Brock, almost like they were running the same route, but like a little bit deeper, a little bit further in front of him. He just kind of lofts it up there, and that's the Patrick Surtain pick six. And it felt like from there, the momentum completely shifted as then all of a sudden the offense starts going. Once again, I got to say, are we seeing the revival of Javonte Williams? He, I believe, forced 8 missed tackles on his 18 total touches, which is the equivalent of the total missed tackles that he had forced in the first 4 games as a whole. So, and that was the big thing that people were hyping up Javonte for his rookie year, was this guy was not only incredibly efficient and really good yards after contact, but I think he was like up there with like Nick Chubb and McCaffrey when it came to like the top 3 for like missed tackle rate. It was insane. So he was looking like a potential elite running back because of the amount of missed tackles that he was forcing his rookie year. Obviously, the injury happens, wasn't really able to do that. I'm not saying he's fully back. I don't want to buy any of this hope because I do own him in a dynasty league, and I really want him to be back because of my running back situation. I got good running backs, but some of them seem to maybe be losing their job. Maybe not. Maybe we'll see. I have Rashad White and ETN, so if you have him, you know my pain. So I don't want to say he's back, but in this game, it was definitely his best game of the year. And in terms of offense, he was their leading receiver. He had 5 catches. The closest in terms of receptions was Little Jordan Humphrey and Cortland Sutton both had 2. And he took it for 50 yards, which is the most yards on the team. And he also had 13 carries for 61 yards for almost 5 yards a carry. And I think that the fact that now they have somewhat of a running game, the fact that Javonte can be a difference maker, we talked about it the first couple weeks, they couldn't run the ball at all, which was forcing Bo Nix to throw the ball 30, 40 times, either by design because they were, just had no confidence in the run game, so they were, just throwing it instead, or because they were getting behind and the run game wasn't efficient at all, so they have to now throw the ball. Now in this game, they finally have balance. Bo Nix throws it 27 times. We've got 28 total runs. Now, Bo Nix did run 8 of those himself, but still the fact that there's 20 runs across the running backs and 1 for Marvin Mims, we like to see that. So kudos to Sean Payton and the offense because it felt like they finally found a good balance. And I got to give a big shout out to this Denver defense because, man, they're starting to look really good. I believe they have top 3 highest blitz rate in the league. But it's working. It has been working because we saw that game against the Jets. They've been competitive the last 3 weeks, and I believe this is 3-0 in the last 3 weeks now. They're on a 3-win streak, or am I wrong?
Let me double check. No, I think you're right. Yeah, you're right. They're 3 straight.
3 straight,
including being the Bucks. Yeah, 26-7.
I mean, you beat Tampa Bay, so it's not like they're playing Tampa. Scrubs, right? It's not like it's the Raiders and the Jets and you throw in the Panthers. Like Tampa Bay is a good team. The Jets, a lot of people were expecting to potentially be a playoff team. The Raiders last year were solid. Like these are good franchises, good teams. So solid win for the Denver Broncos, a big divisional one as well. I did allude to the fact in the previous episode that they, my buddy who's a Broncos fan said that they cannot stop the tight end, and the Raiders tight ends always tear him a new one. Well, Brock Bowers did, in fact, do that, so shout out that. I love Brock Bowers, considering I have him in 2 of my 3 fantasy leagues, but they were able to overcome it. So shout out to the Denver Broncos because they have really turned it around after what seemed like it could have been a miserable start to the season. No run game. Bo Nix looks nervous. Defense isn't great. All 3 of those things have changed. They look like a completely different team.
Yeah, I mean, eliminating the turnovers, being more efficient, just to kind of add on what you're saying. I mean, and we're seeing, like Bo Nix play a little more confidence, run game get going. Denver's looking. We mentioned before the season started, like this is a big season for Sean Payton, and like you said, it was not looking good I mean, granted, too, those first two games were one possession games. They were in that game with Seattle. So they lost 26-20, that one possession. And then even the Steelers game, 13-6. We know it's the Steelers, but still, they were still right there. Like you mentioned, the whole time, defense, for the most part, doing their job. Because even the Seattle game, I know 26 was technically what they gave up, but like they generated like 2 safeties as well, if you remember that first week. So, whether it's secondary, the pass rush, they're figuring out ways to do that. And the offense is doing just enough and also coming along, like you're saying. Seemingly the right time and gaining momentum. So we'll see if they can keep doing so. But yeah, I don't have much else to say there. Interesting to see what the Raiders do. Apparently, this week's supposed to be a hot week to try to get rid of Devontae. I'm sure they want that distraction and Cloud kind of out of there. But it'll be interesting to see, I guess, if they are able to strike a deal and with whom. But in the meantime, they unfortunately take that L on the road. Big win for the Broncos. They go to 3-2. Raiders also still not a lost season. They're 2-3, but obviously dealing with all that stuff. So we'll see how they handle that and how it affects them going forward. But anything else there, or can I move on to the next one?
That's it.
All right. This one I can go first. It's my team. My Packers win 24-19 over the Rams. I honestly for this one I don't have. But it felt a lot like, honestly, this was like it feels like a typical Rams game, like almost like the 49ers one when they played a few weeks ago, where the Packers got ahead, especially in that third quarter. And then it was just all about holding on for dear life and hope, and Stafford made some great plays, but unfortunately it's really just him and Kyron Williams. I know Jordan Willington had a solid day, but really like in terms of playmakers, not just, Stafford hitting guys when they're open, there's not really much. And even then, Kyron Williams had a huge fumble as well. And obviously Stafford had a pick. So, and then Jordan Love still, I think Christine's still a little bit rusty. And obviously it doesn't help. No Romeo Dobbs was suspended due, I don't even know what. It's like some personal stuff between him and the team. I don't know, so I'm not going to get involved. But he'll be back this week, so that's good. And then obviously no Christian Watson. But nonetheless, Jaden Reed, though. I know Tucker Kraft was technically leading receiver, but Jaden Reed really got the team going early, too. He got that big... it looked like a terrible throw. I don't know if you saw it. Like Love threw it. It was like a deep post/crosser. There's like 3 Rams there, and Reed ended up. I guess that's why they played DB. They couldn't track the ball, and Reed ended up getting the ball, got down like the 1 or 2, and then Josh Jacobs punched it in. So just things like that could start for the Packers, and then they just held on even without Jair in this game as well. So that things like that are always helpful. And before I throw it to you, shout out Xavier McKinney as well, because he's had he's literally had a pick every game. So, and one of our rare free agent additions as well. So hopefully it continues cashing in. I don't expect him to get a pick every single game going forward. But as long as he's playing with that sort of confidence, the defense play that sort of confidence too, because it feels like, and when I was watching the game before I throw it to you, I felt like I was scared because in previous Packer iterations and teams and defenses, we absolutely let the Rams back in the game, or, Matthew Stafford does punch in that touchdown drive and just absolutely rip our hearts out at the end of the game, even though we were the better team for a majority of it. So, that's about it for me. Good road win for my Packers to get back on track. Your thoughts, if any, here?
Don't have a lot more than what you said. Tucker Kraft, good to see him, kind of have some explosive plays. Feels like that
he might be tight end 1, by the way. Yeah. Like, as much as I love Luke Musgrave, who was our second rounder last year, it feels like Tucker's the better all-around guy, and it's kind of showing with his production and his snap count.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It feels like he's pretty much won that tight end spot, because it feels like Musgrave's not really doing much of anything at this point. And I'm wondering if it's somewhat related to the run blocking. Tucker Kraft seems to be a monster when it comes to blocking in the run. Musgrave, so far from what I've seen, doesn't seem like the greatest at it. And we know
he was definitely more of an athlete project,
right? And I mean, with the stuff that Tucker Kraft was doing too, like it's not like he's not an athlete either, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, considering the fact that he can run block well, and we know that LaFleur kind of comes from the Shanahan tree, where the run game is such a crucial part of the system, I'm not surprised to see that Tucker Kraft is, starting to blossom and get a lot more work because of, his willingness to, kind of be like a George Kittle. Not saying he's obviously Kittle, but fill that sort of role of like willing to do the dirty work and also make some explosive plays to go along with it. So if he can get more in the fold, that'll be interesting. That said, I do think maybe it's also somewhat related to like no Dobbs, Christian Watson hurt, Dontavian Wicks didn't do too much with the targets he was getting. So Tucker Kraft became a little bit more involved. So I'm not expecting 90 yards and 2 touchdowns every week, but who knows? Who knows where he can go from here? Other than that, I don't really have much else to say on either side outside of the Rams. Yeah, like you said, just missing some of their playmakers.
Yeah, 'cause obviously, it's still a close game despite that, and that's kudos to Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay for just trying to do what they can with what they got. But anyway, speaking of doing what you can, what you got, let's go over to one of the other surprises of the late afternoon slot. It was the New York Giants. They get the win over Seattle in Seattle, 29-20 here, especially without Malik Neighbors as well. It was Darius Slayton had I guess you could say, vintage performance. It hadn't had something like that in a couple of years. And then old Tyrone Tracy stepped into at running back for Devin Singletary, and this offense looked like it didn't miss a beat in terms of that. So what were your thoughts here in regards to the Giants getting a big win over the Seahawks?
This was an unfortunate one for Seattle because it felt like they were going to be in control early, and then they just kind of slowed down offensively. New York was able to kind of take over the game. Seattle was never really able to put it into a position where the Giants weren't able to start running the ball. And for the Giants, obviously no Singletary. They seem to have found a key difference maker in Tyrone Tracy in this one. Now, will he continue to do so in the future? Remains to be seen, but at least in this one, he had a heck of a day. And at the very least, if I'm the Giants coaching staff, I'm starting to look at this kid and think, maybe we get him a little bit more work even when Singletary is back, because he had 18 carries, 129 yards on the ground. He had a fantastic day, and I think was a key reason as to why the Giants were able to maintain the lead, because if I know anything about Daniel Jones, it's that if you let him throw too many times and they're playing from behind, at some point mistakes are going to happen, and he's not great when having to play from behind. But when they have a lead, we've seen that in the day ball system, he can slow it down and not do too much, which he did in this one. So he had a solid day. Also, got to give kudos to Darius Slayton because he stepped up big time in the absence of Malik Neighbors. For Seattle, like I said, it just felt like they unfortunately kind of fell behind the 8 ball here. Especially offensively, they got a touchdown off of that Eric Gray fumble where Rayshon Jenkins returned it
yards.
The entire length of the field. And so outside of that, offensively, they only scored 13 total points. DK Metcalf did lose the fumble. Otherwise, they didn't really have any turnovers. It just seemed like they couldn't sustain drives. And I think a large part of that was the fact that they weren't able to run the ball and also just simply weren't patient with the run game whatsoever. Despite the fact that, once again, at halftime, this was a tie ball game. It wasn't like at any point the game was out of hand. They just, for some reason, weren't committing to the run.
I'm looking up Seattle's offensive corner because it's a trend I've noticed. I think if you go back, especially their recent games, they've gotten away with it in a couple of their wins where they've been really pass happy.
Geno literally leads the league in both pass attempts and passing yards. So
and
it's not like every game they're playing from behind, like the Detroit one,
Yeah. So in regards to just to add on and continue, I think one of the issues I mentioned it before the season, I think it's starting to rear its ugly head, is that and this can be fixed, like you said, maybe being more patient with the run. Is Geno got hit, got sacked 7 times. He was under pressure a lot of the game as well. He was their leading rusher, and it wasn't right by design. One of those runs is 32-yarder, and that was anyway. So kudos to the Giants there for just not letting really for the Seattle's offensive line get going, and then from there, like you said, just it felt like that probably was the reason why their offense was in a bit of disarray. On top of the fact that DK unfortunate fumble, which led to a field goal, and even then. Seattle had chances. They had a chance to tie the game with about a minute and a half or a minute left, and then unfortunately they just the punt got blocked, or the field goal got blocked. Excuse me, the field goal tried to tie it, got blocked. Giants take it back and basically ice the game at that point. So tough loss for Seattle, especially at home, because it was one I felt like I said, I felt like they were going to get away with this one. If they just hit the field goal, maybe go to overtime. Who knows what happens there, especially with Seattle having more playmakers. But Giants. It's very similar, like I said, to the formula from a couple of years ago, where hey, Daniel Jones, just don't make any mistakes, and we'll let them mess up and capitalize. And for the most part, like you said, the Giants, that's what got the Giants to win, especially all 3 phases, including that special teams block and score. So be interesting to see how they handle the running back thing, because Tyrone Tracy looked pretty good here. Even Eric Gray looked solid in a couple of moments, especially in the receiving game, but obviously he fumbled, so it makes sense to why he got put in the doghouse pretty quickly there, because obviously that literally was almost a game-changing moment, or it was, but almost cost him the game in that sense. Luckily it didn't. So great, important win for the Giants. We mentioned staying alive. They're 2-3, and just mucking things up for the NFC West, as Seattle could have kind of had a nice cushion if they had won that, gone to 4-1. But instead, they are 3-2 and suffered their first home loss of the season. So that's all the Sunday afternoon games. Let's move on over to your game on Sunday night, John, as it was delayed. Some of us had to, I don't know, it was like basically went to the next day, became Monday morning, early morning football. But nonetheless, your Cowboys won 20-17 despite that, and in Pittsburgh as well. So yeah, what were your thoughts here in regards to your Cowboys getting a crucial win here?
It was a big win, and I definitely feel better than I did against the Giants because, the Giants won. I felt like they should have won by more. Similar score in this one, but I still feel like Dallas should have won by more, quite frankly. The only reason I feel better is because it's Pittsburgh, and they're a much better team than the Giants, in my opinion. But still, when you look at the stats, Dallas had 445 total yards of offense. That is almost double, literally like only 6 yards less than double what the Steelers had on offense. They had 226 total yards. That's despite the fact that they had one less drive. And the simple fact was they just weren't executing when they got in the red zone. There was the Brandon Aubrey field goal that got blocked. There was the first turnover, which I believe was the Dak fumble, in which the offensive line just completely broke down. Both tackles allowed Dak to get sacked from both sides, and he fumbled, which I don't blame him when T.J. Watt and I believe it was Herbinger on the other side who did get hurt.
Nick Herbig, yeah.
Herbig, yeah. They're both having field days against tackles for the most part, and we're able to get in there and just smack Dak pretty much instantly too. And he did hold the ball a little bit there, but it's like it's either throw it away immediately and at the back of the end zone or what have you, or try and hold it and see if somebody gets open and hope that you don't get destroyed. But unfortunately, he got destroyed and he fumbled. So it was that one, and then there was the other two. The blocked field goal. I think Aubrey maybe misses it anyway, based on what they were saying on the broadcast. That I didn't see the replays or anything like that, but both commentators were talking about how they felt like when they saw the replay, he probably shanked it left. So who knows? Maybe the block saved him from what was going to be a miss, and he won't get the blame for it. But regardless, seems like there was some issues there on special teams. This is now back-to-back weeks, too, in which there's been a blocked field goal from Brandon Aubrey. So that needs to be fixed. And then there was the one interception that Dak threw in the red zone where it was like CeeDee Lamb on a deep curl. Dak preemptively threw it, and it got intercepted. And afterwards, there's a clip where Chris Collinsworth didn't make it any better. There's a clip of CeeDee Lamb on the sideline, and Collinsworth says, "I'll leave that up to the lip readers." And it's like, if you actually go and watch the clip and read CeeDee's voice or CeeDee's mouth, he's saying, "Jump ball 4, jump ball, I got you." But the way that they talked about it made it seem like, because, CeeDee and Dak have had some blow-ups in some recent weeks on the sidelines. It has not been the most friendly of situations, CeeDee being frustrated or whatever. But that one, it just seemed like he was just saying, just give me a jump ball. You threw the curl, whatever. Let's just, in the end zone in that situation, just let me go up and make a play. And I agree with CeeDee in that situation. I don't know what the play call was, if it was supposed to be a jump ball and Dak didn't throw because he thought he could squeeze it in or what. But I agree with CeeDee. Just throw up the jump ball in that corner in a one-on-one and let CeeDee do his thing because he's really good in the jump balls. So I felt like that one was a little blown out of context, just to clear that one up. Otherwise, on the game, I got to give a shout out to the coaching staff and Rico Dowdle, because this felt like the first game they finally trusted Rico in a game where they needed to, because we need to establish the run. It's just a simple fact of football. Like, we can't go the whole season or running the ball 7 times for 30 yards. Like, we need to establish a run game here. And they did with Rico. He 20 carries for 87 yards, and it was a grinded out kind of game because his longest was only 13 yards. And so shout out to him because he was having a heck of a game. He even added some stuff in the receiving game with that one touchdown catch. So I'm hoping that this is something we continue to do in the future, because I've been saying this for weeks, and you can attest to this. We need to get Rico Dowdle the ball more. We need to stop giving it to Zeke, stop giving it to, the occasional, now I'm blanking on his name, tiny guy.
Are you talking about Deuce Vaughn?
Deuce Vaughn, yeah. Stop giving it to Deuce Vaughn because they keep mixing him in a little bit there. I'm okay with the short yardage Hunter Lupke or Zeke for those kind of situations. I'm okay with the explosive attempts to CD and Kavontae Turpin. In fact, I encourage those. But simply put, I've been saying we need to get Rico Dowdle 15 touches a game minimum, and whether that's through the receiving, whether that's through running the ball. And I'm hoping it's mainly through running the ball. So I'm a big fan of the fact that he touched it 22 times in this one. I like that, and I want to see that continue moving forward. For the receiving game, CD, 5 catches for 62 yards. It felt like he was largely taken out of the game after that first drive. He had a great first drive where he had like 4 catches for 50 yards. And then after that, the Steelers were rolling safeties his way all night. And that did bode well for some of the Cowboys' big plays. I believe it was a Jalen Tolbert big play down the sideline where Minkah Fitzpatrick kind of got a little bit lost on the movement on the right side. CD, I think, moved. Dak kind of flicks his eyes that way. Minkah Fitzpatrick bites on it, and boom, you've got Jalen Tolbert one-on-one on the sideline in a situation where Minkah should have been there, and it was just because they were rolling safeties, CDs the whole day. So I love the fact that Jalen Tolbert stepped up and had a huge game, his best game of his career by far. He had the game-winning touchdown. He was absolutely crucial, and I'm glad to see it because it really felt like we know what we're going to get out of CD. We know what we're going to get out of Ferguson. Those guys are both studs. But we need to see some other people step up in the run game, in the receiving game. Cooks went on IR. Who else is going to step up? Jalen Tolbert felt like he's kind of living up to what they thought he could be when they drafted him after the first couple years were a little bit rough. But it feels like he's finally built that chemistry and, is maybe starting to become a testament of, once again, you got to give these guys some time. And Rico Dowdle is definitely, a similar case where he's been, I don't think people realize this. Rico Dowdle's been in the league for like 4 or 5 years. He just had so many injuries. And I think he was on a team even before the Cowboys that, now he's finally getting a chance. So I love to see it offensively. I just think they need to clean up some of those turnovers, clean up some of the red zone issues. And honestly, let's say they do throw this jump ball to CD. He gets a touchdown there. Let's say Aubrey doesn't get his field goal blocked. Then all of a sudden this is a 30-17 game and it's not even close. And we don't need that, drive at the end of the game to have, to take the lead. So yeah, I'm proud of the way that they won. This was definitely a tough, grinded out game. I'm glad that they were able to show some clutch factor because it felt like throughout a lot of my life, they have that in moments, but sometimes against better teams, against winning teams specifically, that's always been the critique of Dak. He doesn't win against winning teams. Well, they came in against a 3-1 Pittsburgh Steelers, and they were able to do it on the road. So I like to win, just need to clean some stuff up for Pittsburgh, which I guess this is also something I want to talk about. Dallas, credit to Mike Zimmer, the defense. They looked really good. They completely stopped the run game for the most part. And Justin Fields in the passing game just felt disconnected. It felt like he wasn't really able to get Pickens going at all. And
also, I was going to mention that Pickens didn't have he had less snap count than Van Jefferson and some other guys.
Yeah, I was reading on it. I believe it was in the 12 personnel specifically. Historically, the last few weeks, he's been almost 90% participation on the 12 personnel. And in this specific game, I think he played 2 snaps in the 12 personnel. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe it was 5 snaps or something. But and for the most part, I think they were all run blocking snaps too. So I don't know what that was about. I don't know if he was injured. I also saw a video of him running a route that he didn't really seem to be putting in a full effort. So maybe it was disciplinary. I don't know the reason. Maybe it was just a matchup thing. But for, like I said, they just weren't able to get Pickens or pretty much anybody going. And I wouldn't be surprised if this intensifies the reports that they go after Devontae Adams, because when Pickens doesn't get going, it feels like they really have no passing attack. It feels like nobody else has really stepped up for the most part outside of that one Calvin Austin game.
Yeah. I wouldn't be shocked, and this is no testament maybe to Fields, but maybe I won't be, because they've been so gung-ho about Russ that, maybe we see Russ in the next few weeks.
Sure.
Because obviously I think we all feel that, in theory, because it's been downhill the past few years, so it could be more downhill, but he's the better, pure passer, I guess, in terms of, but yeah, this, like you said, though, in regards to this game, honestly, Dallas should have won by more, but it's typical Pittsburgh where, they kind of muck it up. Even the pick wasn't great, but then, the fumble, I think that's a little more credit. Like you said, unfortunate, but credit like I said, TJ Watt. It feels like every time TJ Watt gets a free sack, that free rush like that, it's going to be a strip sack anyway.
Yeah.
So, like you said, good on Dallas's defense for holding strong without Micah Parsons or DeMarcus Lawrence. That's one of the big reasons why I think we both went Pittsburgh. Go ahead.
And rookie Marshawn Nealand, who was the other edge rusher that was, kind of contributing on the season.
He left like in the first quarter.
Yeah, he got injured almost immediately, and so he was out. So, I mean, big credit to all the edge rushing room because and specifically, actually, big credit to the interior defensive line because I believe Odigizua got a sack. What's his name? He used to play for the Vikings. This is going to bother me. Defensive tackle Linval Joseph, he got a big sack too. So big shout out to those guys because they stepped up big time, considering those injuries.
Yeah. So, and it's a little bit concerning for Pittsburgh too, like the fact that they weren't. And I think this is more maybe a Najee Harris thing. I think he is just not an explosive back, and that's why they're missing Jalen Warren and or like we mentioned before, Cordarrelle Patterson. One of those guys that's more of the speed finesse. Going when they see the hole, they can take advantage of it. When there's 4 there, they can maybe get 7 or 8 as opposed to Najee. When Najee runs, if there's 4 available, he's gonna get 4. He's not gonna break out. I know he had like a couple of big receptions, but even then, like you said, like the offense was a bit disconnected, and it'll be interesting to see what they do going forward. But yeah, for Dallas, like you said, it's a good win, especially these ugly ones because in previous years, it feels like they don't come out on top in these ugly games where they were the better team majority of the game, but they maybe don't get a couple of the key plays to go their way. But kudos to them for handling that adversity on the road and getting a crucial win, going to 3-2. Ironically, 3-0 away, by the way. So I guess y'all are just a road team now, as opposed to last year where y'all are a dominant home team.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's early seasons. That might correct itself down the line. But big win in prime time for Dallas. And Steelers maybe coming back to earth. Now lost 2 straight in the last 2. So speaking of those teams staying perfect, though, let's go to the Kansas City Chiefs. They stay perfect. They go to 5-0, defend home field against the Saints 26-13 as they were mostly in control of this game, especially with Derek Carr leaving later in the game. That pretty much was the icing on the cake there. What were your thoughts here in regards to the Chiefs? Like I said, staying perfect, going 5-0.
Classic Chiefs defensive type of game. I thought it was going to be more defensive on the Saints end, which, it never really got out of hand for the most part. But I did think that maybe the Saints defense would be able to keep this even more low scoring. But the Chiefs did what I expected them to do. They were able to take Kamara out of the game. Olave had almost no impact. And I am confused about the targets because he only had 4. He had 2 catches for 10 yards. This is supposed to be your wide receiver 1. Rashid Shaheed gets 9. Alvin Kamara gets 8, which you can maybe attribute a lot of that to like dump offs or stuff like that. But then like Jawan Johnson gets 5. Like I feel like there needs to be a more concerted effort to get Olave going because this has been mentioned even in some of their big wins, like against Dallas or against Carolina. Like he didn't have huge games, and I feel like just from they're now 2-3, right? They start off 2-0. They're the 2-week darlings, and then they lose a couple close ones, and these are all good teams that they're losing to. Philadelphia, who they play Tampa Bay in week 4.
I believe so. Or Atlanta, I think.
It was Atlanta. Yeah, it was Atlanta in that overtime win. And then now Kansas City. And so these are good teams that they're losing to, but I just feel like they need that extra guy. When Kamara's not going, when Rashid Shaheed, we've seen in some games, isn't going, you need Olave to step up big time, and he just really hasn't had a game like that. And I don't know. I feel like there needs to be some more plays specifically drawn up to just get him involved because it doesn't seem like that's happening pretty much at all. And then I don't have much else to say about the Chiefs other than the fact that I didn't realize it was 2017, honestly. Kareem Hunt, 100 yards. Juju Smith-Schuster for 130. Travis Kelce was finally back to his old self. What happened to the Kansas City Chiefs? It was like a throwback all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of piggyback off that, to kind of finalize this, I think it helps, like we've mentioned before, helps when you have a good base. It helps when you have a good offensive line. And then, all these other things. And, you can forward to bring in Kareem Hunt, make him look a little bit better than he actually probably is at this point in his career. Same with Juju. I mean, technically Juju should have also maybe had a touchdown, but it was a great defensive play. And that was you can't even say that was a real mistake by the Chiefs. That's just more like a great play by the Saints defense, the thick 6. as I'm sure you saw that highlight too.
Did you see, even then, just real quick, did you see after the game, all the Chiefs defensive linemen came up to him and were like, dude, that was like the play of the game. That was so sick. Like, they all loved it. Like, obviously the fact that they won was probably why, they're happy, because it didn't affect the result, but they were hyping him up like crazy. Shout out to Kalen Saunders.
Yeah, former Chief as well too. He was one of their key, a couple of the key runs used the clogger. But yeah, I mean, like you said, this is the Chiefs style right now. It's funny. People are comparing to those Patriots teams. It kind of is. They're just like, offense is doing enough, and they're bringing in, some of these washed vets and making them look a little better. But then mostly too, though, the defense, like Nick Bolton. We talk about Chris Jones all the time, and deservedly so. Like Chris Jones, you saw in this game. Impact everywhere, and we know that Spags is a great play caller, but like some of these pieces, like Nick Bolton, been a very good linebacker for them for a couple of years. Like, he's been big for them, and because they didn't let the run game get going at all. I wonder too if maybe a reason why the Saints struggled, and not their fault, but to all sense, but like Clint Kubiak spent a lot of time in San Francisco, so maybe I'm sure that there was a bit of familiarity for Spags. Like, okay, I know, some of the rules or things they like to do, because very similar to Kyle Shanahan, obviously, when they played in the Super Bowl and recent years, the Chiefs. So, just efficient win for them. Good little touchdown seeing that they got Xavier Worthy somewhat involved, though not really in the pass game. But hey, they're finding ways to get him the ball. And I'm sure that they'll come as the season goes. And like you said, I don't expect Juju to keep doing this, but it's good that that someone is stepping up. And that, like you said, Travis Kelce especially kind of had a somewhat vintage performance. I mean, you could say, I guess it was vintage, 9 for 70. So, crucial for them, 5-0, and they are in the driver's seat in the AFC at this point, especially too, and within their own division. And then for the Saints, like, only other thing I want to add or mention, it'd be interesting to see. It sounds like obviously Derek Carr's going to miss a bunch of time going forward, or at least a week or so. So it seems like could be maybe Spencer Rattler. I'm surprised it wasn't Spencer Rattler. Granted, it was only 7 passes, or I don't know how many snaps. Jake Haener didn't look like it. I'm sorry, Jake. It didn't look like it.
I will say,
it was at the end of the game, and against the Chiefs. So
It's the Chiefs.
They know you're going to pass.
I believe this was in Kansas City as well, which is one of the toughest environments to go play. To put a rookie quarterback out there and be like, all right, go win the game, buddy, against Chris
fun
Jones.
Dealing with Spags. You're going to see some crazy blitzes.
Yeah,
good luck.
I wouldn't want to put him in that situation either, because you talk about ruining kids' confidence. If we're looking at a situation where Carr might be out for the foreseeable future, however many games that is, and we got to get this kid ready to go, I don't want his first NFL action to be Chris Jones, put him on the dirt and just throwing a pick or something. I don't want that,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm interested to see what they do going forward. Because I forgot what news report, maybe it was Bleacher Report. But anyway, and now they were saying that they're considering maybe having Rattler as quarterback one. We'll see how it goes. But like you said, Saints gotta kind of turn that. Unfortunate timing, as they've kind of been on the down slope. They got the Bucks next week. It doesn't get easier. Then they have the Broncos the week after. Granted, both are at home, so maybe that helps. But not easy outs there. And then also the Chargers on the road as well. So we'll see if they can bounce back going forward without Derek Carr. And for the Chiefs, I mean, they also have a little bit of gauntlet too, though. They have the Niners next week on the primetime afternoon game. So that will be very interesting as well, obviously. So, anything else you wanted to add or mention before we wrap it up there?
Only final thing I will say on the Derek Carr thing is, which I believe he's still out with injury too, but who knows? Maybe if they don't want to go with either situation, we still got Taysom Hill out there. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, well, and it'll be interesting, though, because, I know you mentioned, I think that's another thing, too, of why maybe their offense has slowed down the past 2 weeks, at least, is, Taysom Hill was getting involved early in the season. He was kind of like, I know his phrase used often, but he was their Swiss Army knife. They were using him in different ways, tight end, in the backfield, and oftentimes it would lead to those explosive plays that they got early in the season, and it hasn't been, like you mentioned, as easy for them in recent weeks. So maybe, him being out has affected that.
Right.
So. And it'll be interesting to see if he's healthy too. Do they just screw it? Let's run the Taysom Hill package this game, especially since Dennis Allen is a defensive head coach as well. So, I would think that fits with his ideology of let's just run the ball for the most part and, out execute them in a sense. But anyhow, big win for the Chiefs at home on Monday night. And by teams on bye week, Lions, Titans, Eagles, Chargers. So hope you all enjoyed your week off a month into the season. So anything, that was it pretty much from John. That'll be it for me as well. So we will be back later in the week to make our week 6. I almost said 5. It's just week 5. Week 6 picks against the spread, of course, /bets. And I'll re-update the standings. If you missed it earlier, you can go back and check that. But otherwise, we will see you all next time. Adios.